Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. This is Bloomberg Businessweek, insight from the reporters and editors that bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Businessweek. That's Carol Massar. I'm Tim Stenovec. We talked a little bit about Japan.
We did.
And a ski trip in Japan.
Yeah.
Let's bring it a little closer to home.
A little bit closer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Talk Mexico and Canada.
Our
Specifically,
our neighbor.
Canada. Because President Donald Trump signaled plans to impose previously threatened tariffs on as much as 25% on Mexico and Canada by February 1st. He reiterated his contention that America's closest neighbors and largest trading partners are letting undocumented migrants and drugs flood into the United States. Both Canada and Mexico have said they'd retaliate against American goods if Trump slaps tariffs on them. The USMCA, by the way, it's that trade deal that Trump negotiated during his first term. That's up for review in 2026. Marianne Carter is principal at Earnscliffe Strategies. It's a firm that does government relations. They do strategic communications and more for many companies, including those U.S. companies that do business in Canada, as well as those Canadian counterparts, those that do business and operate in the U.S. Marianne joins us from Key West, Florida this afternoon. Marianne, good to have you with us. What are you hearing from your clients, those Canadian companies that operate here in the U.S. and also the U.S. companies that have business in Canada? What are you hearing from them right now as this threat of tariff looms?
First of all, thanks for having me. There's a lot of concern. There's, as you both know, business likes certainty. And when President Trump even provided the mere threat of putting on tariffs several weeks ago, many questions were when, how, is this just a negotiating tactic looking ahead to the review of USMCA in 2026? But now he's come out and said that as of February 1st, he intends to impose these tariffs. And I think there is significant concern on both sides of the border regarding how this will impact consumers directly, but also the cost of business increasing.
I did mention that the president said that America's closest neighbors and largest trading partners are letting undocumented migrants and drugs flood into the U.S. Our team here at Bloomberg reporting that last year there were just over 1 million encounters with illegal border crossers by U.S. Border Patrol at the U.S.-Mexico border. Mm-hmm. But in Canada, there were only 22,369.
So not many.
That's according to data from the CPB. When it comes to fentanyl, the U.S. Border Service seized about 20,600 pounds of fentanyl at the Mexico-U.S. border and then 50 pounds at the Canada-U.S. border.
All right. So that's interesting for a little perspective in terms of the concerns that have been voiced by President Trump and then, in terms of what we might see in terms of tariffs. Marianne, I mean, there are things that President Trump will say, and then there's the things that actually get done. And then so I am curious what you're hearing from your clients, the questions that they are raising, and what people think ultimately will result from the U.S. in terms of any kind of tariffs against Canada. I mean, we know there's so much trade that goes back and forth in the auto sector, certainly. And so we know that ultimately that would be perhaps paid by U.S. consumers. So I'm just curious, and that's just one aspect of the trade between the two nations.
Right. I think it's important to distinguish that I'm hearing different things. I think business understands that this could be catastrophic for our integrated economies, particularly in the auto sector, but also as we export oil and energy to the U.S. and as well as critical minerals. But I think Canadians are very clear that the government, and I think we're fairly unified, that if tariffs are imposed on Canadian business, that Canada is not going to sit idly and watch it happen. Canada will push back quite significantly. And in terms of counter tariffs imposed on American goods and services. And I think Canadian business, my clients at least, stand behind that. However, in the US side, and less my clients, but I think generally there is not as much understanding from the Americans on how reliant they are on the Canadian economy. I think auto sector is pretty well understood, but I don't know in some of those key states that some people realize their jobs are significantly reliant on goods going back and forth between the Canadian American borders, or if we do find ourselves in a trade war, that the price of gas is going to go up at the pumps. And on the oil side, at least, we export a lot of those raw materials, and then things are refined in the U.S. So it's unlike similarly the China issue where it's more of the finished good. It would completely disrupt the American supply chain dynamic in several industries. And I don't think it's well understood that it will impact their day-to-day living. And so I hear quite different things. And I think that's naturally also because Canada knows a lot about the United States. The United States is a superpower, and we tend to understand the trading relationship and how much that is important, not only friends and neighbors, but it's very good for our economy. It's also good for the American economy. So I think if anything, I'm hearing from American clients that there needs to be more education and proactivity from the Canadians, both on the political and business sides, to make them understand how this could impact the business in the U.S. as well.
How seriously are you taking this threat?
Look, I think everyone's pretty aware that only President Trump knows what he's going to do. And so I think people are recognizing that it could be a significant reality. I think why there's concern is that so much of his campaign had relied on bringing those American jobs back, particularly in the steel industry, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think he's pretty serious about doing that. But I think it's a matter of we just don't know based on having seen him in office previously, and when the NAFTA review happened under his tenure, we saw how challenging that was in terms of negotiation. So I think people are taking it very seriously because it ultimately would create a serious recession in Canada and loss of jobs. But I think where there is some relief in some respects is we don't know. He could just wake up one day and say, actually, I'm deciding not to do this. But since he said the February 1st deadline a couple of days ago, I think there's a lot of nervousness that could be a stark reality in a couple of weeks.
Do you see this as the threat on Mexico and Canada being equal in the sense of like the chance that Trump will follow through on those? Do you see it with China more so, like in terms of trade priorities? How are you thinking about it?
I think Canada and the U.S. are pretty aligned, I think, on navigating issues around China as it pertains to national security and trade issues. I think what's been problematic, unfortunately, you had raised earlier the immigration dynamics and fentanyl. Like Canada is just not Mexico and vice versa. And I think the Canadians are getting lumped into some of the major challenges on the issues in Mexico, and it's not as impactful. But I think, unfortunately, we're coming as one-size-fits-all deal, and I think that's just by the nature of the history with NAFTA. So I think we haven't really seen any distinguishing between Mexico and Canada. We're often lumped together, even though I think it's pretty clear that the issues related to trade are quite different.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Hey, Marianne, thank you so much. Great to get some time with you. She's principal at Earnscliffe Strategy. It's a firm that does government relations, strategic communications, and a lot more for a lot of companies, including those U.S. companies that do business in Canada, as well as some of the Canadian companies that operate in the U.S. So a really smart perspective in terms of what may or may not be in terms of tariffs coming from the U.S. to Canada.
Well, you might remember just yesterday we covered this news. The MLB said it ordered its employees to return to the office 5 days a week. The move makes MLB the latest U.S. employer to require workers to return to their desks more often, joining Amazon, AT&T, JP Morgan Chase, and more. And in fact, just in the last 48 hours or so, President Donald Trump has also ordered federal government workers back to their office. Maybe some of those employees, Carol, asking themselves as they get back to their desks, what am I doing here? Why am I at this desk? Why am I at this job? After all, the last few years have been pretty wild.
Yeah.
We've got global unrest. We had a pandemic. A lot of people are thinking differently about work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And
Priorities, right?
Yet, here I am, back at work 5 days a week.
So are you asking why are we here?
Well, it's a question that Jennifer Moss is asking. She's a journalist and author. She's been on our air before. She's got a new book out. It's called Why Are We Here? Creating a Work Culture That Everyone Wants. She joins us from Kitchener, Ontario in Canada. Welcome back, Jennifer. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. I think we're all asking that question.
Why do you think we're asking that question now more so than ever?
Well, there's been a bunch of reasons, and you named a few, but I think it's just an existential question for an existential time. And, I've been talking about the future of work, what that looks like. I think we've sort of jumped into the multiverse of work, and it was just jumped this timeline. And, everything throughout the pandemic, throughout the last couple of years has exploded. Work was already not working that great beforehand, but it, again, like a crisis just exacerbates these existing problems. And so there's high burnout. People are feeling this level of ennui, this level of dissatisfaction and detachment. And a lot of it is because we went through this mortality facing event, and it's changed our priority structures about work and life and how they fit into each other.
All right, I can just see an older generation saying, oh, come on, folks, work is about paying the bills. Work is about, putting a roof over your heads.
I've heard people say work is a 4-letter word.
Exactly. So it's just, what has really changed? People work, yes, to find fulfilling careers and all that great stuff, no doubt about it. But ultimately, it's about supporting yourself, isn't it? Or, making sure your family is supported.
Well, what happens when you go through something so cataclysmic in your life, your brain does this really interesting thing. It starts to reorganize its priorities because it actually does subconsciously think that life is short. And so when you are doing something that feels toxic or it's exhausting or you feel depleted by it, it starts to become reorganized as a lower priority. And that's why you're seeing so much pushback. And, we used to have a transactional relationship with work. But I've been saying that, really since the advent of the car phone, when work became something else and it moved into our personal lives, that relationship became a social contract. So employers want us to be able to work anywhere, everywhere, at all times. Well, then they have to fulfill that, their end of the bargain, in that it has become this social relationship and it's not just transactional anymore.
So I guess the question is, what adjustment people are making as a result of this. We certainly saw that happen during the pandemic. A lot of people who thought they'd work remotely or maybe just said, you know what, this isn't worth it to me. I want to move somewhere else in the country. I want to do something different. Is that shift still happening? Are people moving? Are people making big life changes later in their careers as a result of this existential crisis?
Well, when you look at the people that have mobility, it's your top talent. It's the ones you really want to stay. They're the ones leaving when they feel this level of dissatisfaction. They'll go to a place that has the work-life balance and all of those other, that criteria that they're looking for. And what happens is those that are not able to have that mobility are staying and they are detached. So, the great detachment is what Gallup's calling it, where people are actually so actively disengaged and unhappy at work. They're less productive and they're less impactful on your bottom line. They're actually detracting from your bottom line. So it feels good that we are seeing, yes, this level of mobility change, but people that are really good that you want to stay are leaving. And then you have this glut of people that are unhappy, and they're the ones that, are going to impact whether you are competitive. We're also seeing right now we're going into the silver tsunami where, peak 65, where so many people are turning 65 and they're not choosing to return. They're leaving. We're seeing mass early retirements, which is changing the labor force. We're seeing young cohorts decide to go into freelancing and not opt into that corporate world. And we're also seeing women exiting and moving into a part-time work. So the labor force is definitely shifting, and we need to be careful about, saying, okay, well, at least we have that mobility managed. No, we don't. If we have people there that are disengaged and unhappy, it's actually worse than if they quit.
All right. Well, Tim and I are doomed because I'm looking at page 61. Eating lunch with others pays off. One study found that participants who ate together were more cooperative and trusting compared to those who did not. Eating with others also improved tenure and enhanced overall work group performance. Actually, maybe we're not doomed because we do eat lunch together often, but we're at our desk. Are you saying that workers
those
have
are
to...
Cheerios, Carol.
That's right. I eat Cheerios. There's my lunch. Although Tim sometimes brings a sandwich into the studio, so we're kind of continuing to eat lunch together. I have a banana. I mean, what are you saying? Is it that people need to take a break rather, and go sit on a terrace, go to the office lunchroom, or go outside and go actually sit and have lunch together, which is never going to happen because we're kind of busy, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that you're saying there. One of the things that I write about in the book is time poverty. We're so time starved, and this is really great research by Laura Gersh out of the London School of Economics, and she says that time starvation is really causing these issues of now we're sitting 10 hours a day. There's this rise of it's called dining al desco, which is what you're describing.
Not funny.
Dining.
Rise up. That's how I've been for my whole career.
The dining al desco is one of my favorite definitions that have come out in the last, or terms that have come out in the last couple of years, but it really is only 20 minutes. And that Cornell study that you cited and that I include in the book is really just 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes to improve culture. It's not every day that we have to do this. It's really just focusing on rebuilding that muscle of community, of stepping up, up and away from our desk, finding a way to make the experience of work a little bit better. The reason why people are so resistant to these return to office mandates is that they're going into the office and it feels exactly like what they could be doing at home. If we want to change that dynamic and make the office a place where people want to be, we have to bring the fun back. Going to work right now is like going to school without art, gym, or recess. The fun has left the building. And we need to bring a bit of that back, or else people will just feel like, what is the point? Why am I here?
I have to say, I do miss snack time and nap time. I'm just going to put it out there.
When do you remember nap?
From school. Don't you remember
I do not
that?
even remember that.
I mean, we were little. Yep. We were young. But snack time we used to have. The little milk cartons. You never had that.
No, I don't know. I was such a deprived child.
I guess so.
I don't have memories from back then.
Really?
But that's for a different conversation.
Did you have like a favorite grade? I can remember second grade.
Yeah.
Miss Barbetta.
Oh my gosh. Jennifer, what's wrong with me? Why are we here?
It feels like you had a really sad childhood.
No, I had a great childhood. Don't get me wrong. I just
you had a great childhood.
I remember.
What I know and learned.
All I remember is like playing outside.
Yeah, wow.
Oh, I did go to a school.
We need to bring that back to work then.
I will say maybe I don't
play outside for a bit.
We talk about
maybe I don't remember because
outside.
now that you mention it, I went to this school where they didn't allow sugar in your. This is like California in the 80s and 90s.
We were all into preservatives.
So like you weren't even allowed to bring like jam or jelly on your sandwich.
Hey, listen, one thing I want to ask you about is you also get into DEI, and it does feel like there's a real pushback. We've seen it in the corporate community. We're seeing it from President Trump. We're seeing it in the federal government. DEI, is that good for making us feel more connected, or so far the way it's been implemented not so good? Give us some thoughts here.
Yeah, I dig into the research in the book, and DEI, I think, has faced a lot of problems because it has been a trial and error kind of experiment. And we have to expect that it's not going to be completely figured out. We're dealing with really long-term institutional millennia type problems. You can't just fix it with certain programming or something that's going to be othering people, which is a big problem with a lot of the anti-bias training that we've seen out there. So it hasn't done well. And so it's very easy to attack and say, oh, it's just problematic. But if we don't have a a sense of belonging inside of organizations, how are we going to hit those shared goals? How are we going to have a shared vision? If people feel excluded, then that's a real problem. And I understand, okay, well, maybe DEI in its current form is not working as well as we'd like. It's not optimal, but there's a lot of learning we can do. And if we do eliminate all diversity in the way that we think about creating teams and organizations,
Right.
it's going to be catastrophic. You're going to lose, innovation. You're going to create groupthink. You're going to have people that all look and sound the same coming up with the same ideas, and that doesn't make you competitive or innovative. And so we need to take a step back and not just cut DEI entirely out, but rethink how we do it better and have a bit of grace period for it to take its time to be more functional and optimal. Because right now it still is in a trial and iteration stage.
We had you on a few years ago, back in 2021, for your previous book, The Burnout Epidemic. And I'm wondering if you see how you see that a few years later, especially now as so many companies are requiring people to be back in the office 5 days a week. Do you think that's a mistake?
Absolutely, it is a mistake. I mean, you look at Nicholas Bloom, Stanford economist, Mark Ma, he's a professor at Pittsburgh. They've done a really extensive research study along with their team and have found that if you are really, wanting to be a purely capitalist, you're looking at the economic reasons or rationale or revenue or shareholder impact rationale for work mode, it's hybrid is the number one best way for people to work. It's not fully remote necessarily. Some do it okay, but it's not 5 days in the office. It's a bit of both, and giving people the sense of downtime and having flexibility. What we've determined is flexibility is a right, not a perk these days. It used to be a perk, but now that's changed. People feel like this is my right to have flexibility. Right. And so when we try to make it seem like a perk,
Jennifer,
it ends up just being tone deaf.
We got to run. Good stuff. Journalist and author Jennifer Moss, her new book, Why Are We Here? Creating a Work Culture Everyone Wants. This is Bloomberg. So it was just last year that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, says no level of exposure to PFAS is safe and imposed its first ever drinking water limits on them, requiring water utilities to remove nearly all of the substances from tap water, and it's a move expected to cost billions of dollars to implement. The compounds are found in high levels in the water of many communities around the world. At the same time, we've done some reporting on wastewater treatment plants that we can get into with our next guest. So let's get to it because she knows a lot about this space. Estelle Brachlianoff is the CEO of Veolia. It's the global environmental services company dealing with water and waste management. It is based in Paris, and its ADRs trade in the United States. They have a market cap of around $21 billion. She is with us from Phoenix, Arizona. I apologize. I'm sure I've mangled your name and the company name, so help me out here. But Estelle, it is good to have you here with us. Tell us a little bit more about what your company does and kind of what is waste management today.
No, Anne, you actually did perfectly right. Congratulations for that. So Veolia is a Fortune 500 company, as you said, listed in Paris, but we operate across the globe, including in the US, where we are, in the top 3 of our industry in hazardous waste or in water management and water technologies in the same way, with the big growth opportunities in this country, including the one you mentioned earlier on, which is PFAS removal and treatments to protect human health. Another one being, everything to do with water scarcity. We are the wider water company in the world, operating in many countries. So we've learned from what we've experienced, whether it would be in Australia or, in the southern part of Europe, in the Middle East, and actually in the US as well. So we are leveraging from this global footprint to offer our customer the best-in-class solution to tackle, reducing water footprint, recycling, or removing pollutants.
How big of a business now is removing PFAS? What portion of your revenue comes from that versus other services?
So I guess, it's a fast growing, but still limited. It was 0 2 years ago. We will finish the year 24 with more than 200 million. and we anticipate it to be more 1 billion by the end of the decade. And when I say by, I hope it's before 2030. But removing pollutants, we can talk about PFAS, but there are many other pollutants which we're removing every single day. We are the number one pollutant remover in the world, present in the US, in Europe, in Australia, in the Middle East, and everywhere, really. Very fast growing. We went from having a 1 billion business to more than $5 billion business now, and still moving very, very fast.
So I am curious about PFAS, forever chemicals. I mean, the cleanup of it, is it even possible? It seems so embedded in our society, in water, in products, actually in our bodies already. Is it even possible to make a difference? Or is it too late maybe for the current generations, but maybe something that can be fixed for future generations?
So I guess I will leave, the public authorities and public bodies to decide, what are the priorities and what are the serious harm, and the other places where, it's a little bit less problematic for human health. But when it comes to typically safe drinking water, we have the technologies and solution to remove pretty much every single PFAS in every single circumstances. With various technologies, we innovate quite a lot to be able to concentrate them and then to treat them into a high temperature incinerator, which we have a few in this country, for instance. But I think, there is an element which is not only to be able to technically do that, but to make it affordable. So there is efficiency here to derive solution, which in the end are just what you need, but not too much. So just what you need to remove the harm, but not it's not one technology fits all. You have to dedicate and to design solution depending on the concentration, depending on the geography. And we have an end-to-end solution for PFAS, an offer called Beyond PFAS, which is taking off very, very fast in the US and in other countries the same.
I'm just curious, how do you think about this life cycle of not just forever chemicals, but other pollutants? Are we to the point now where we know what we should and should not have going down the drain, that we get to a point where we will not have to remove stuff from water within our lifetimes? Or is this just getting worse? Is it going the wrong way?
Actually, I would debate that. We are removing and measuring even pollutants, which were already there years and years ago, but we didn't even detect or we didn't even measure, and we didn't know how to treat. So we know how to treat and measure things now, which we didn't 5 or 10 years ago. So they're not necessarily new pollutants, but we are moving in the right direction, as in we know how to treat them. So innovation is helpful to go in the right direction. And so there are a lot of things which were pollutants, which we're talking about a lot in the 70s or in the 80s, which now are behind us because we've moved to the next one. So I guess human progress is helping us to tackling more and more challenges. So I think we have a positive effects on like all the innovation on the way we can tackle these type of pollutants.
You've been at your company for about 2 decades, Estelle, and I am curious about how waste management has changed in terms of the processes.
So waste management has changed a lot in the last 20 years. You're right. I will celebrate my 20th year in Veolia very soon. Because we used to be very like a hole and dump, and now there is a lot we can recycle now, which we didn't even know how to technically. And of course, nobody was really, aware of the potential problem it were to create. So I think I've seen, for instance, now in this country, we know how to recycle electric car batteries. As you can imagine, this is not anything I would have thought of 20 years ago when I joined the company, because there was not even electric cars, let alone, being able to recycle them and to find back, the precious metals which are embedded into those batteries, so nickel, cobalt, and lithium. Another example was the pollutant, as I mentioned, which we are able to treat now, and thanks to innovation. And 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we were not able treat them. But I guess the big thing for me is the realization, which I can see everywhere across the globe. I was last week in the Emirates, of water is absolutely an essential services and an essential element, not only for your daily life, but as well for industries and for, agriculture. I'm in Arizona today. I will visit a microelectronic and microconductor site from TSMC, in which customer of ours. And you know what? If you want cheap manufacturing, you absolutely need water. So the fact of being able to recycle water, to remove pollutants from water, even on an industrial site like that one, has become absolutely paramount. And that's something which we were talking about years ago.
Yeah.
Now it's become real. It's become real. It's for real.
Do we get to the point, though, and I'm wondering, you supply more than 100 million people a year with drinking water, more than 100 million with wastewater services. On the water subject, the drinking water part, you're in an area of the country right now that doesn't have a lot of water. We're seeing fires in Southern California continue to burn, and in fact, new fires crop up due to the dry conditions there. Do you think that we get to a point within our lifetimes where water becomes this scarce enough resource that people are going to start moving away from these desirable places to live, but areas that are just running out of water?
I won't comment on the desire of the population in the next 5 to 10 years. That will be probably too difficult to anticipate. But what I can tell you is I'm not talking about the future. We're talking about now. Last year alone, 80% of the American population experienced water scarcity.
Wow.
So I'm not talking about the future. I'm talking about it's happening now. And I'm not talking only about Arizona or California. 80% of the American population goes across the country. And if I may, across, like a political divide, across, economical divide, it concerns every single of American almost. And I think that's why, the solutions we can offer and what we've developed, thanks to innovation and thanks to our worldwide footprint, is not only helpful, but is much and more needed. That's why, Veolia, I think, has a great future in this country. Already very present, as I said, but a great potential going forward.
It's interesting when you talk about water viscosity, right? That's how water resists flowing, right? Or changes. Like, this is important. Climate change, as Tim kind of touched upon in a big way, the impact that is having and the way the world is going at this point, what makes you a little bit nervous about our access to water?
I guess, climate change is not only about warming, it's about extreme events being more often and more intense. Be it droughts or floodings or hurricanes or mega fires like we are seeing in South California today. So we have to anticipate those events because they're happening here now, and they will be even more frequent and more intense. And the direct consequence of those events is on water. So water is a subject of adaptation to climate change because climate change means too much water or too little water or not at the right time in the year or not of the right quality. That's why we have to adapt. And the big hope or wish I would have that every single one of us cherishes water as opposed to waste it. It's a precious resource. And we have therefore to do a bit more about water conservation, to think about the water footprint of, say, as I said, chips manufacturing. They are really much into what is my water footprint and how can I reduce it. That's great. Through to recycling of water. Water is too precious to be only used once. So recycle it is part of the mix of solution we are developing more and more in this country.
What area of your business is poised for the most growth?
So it's really hazardous waste, which means pollutant removal, and everything to do with water, water technologies and operating networks. So those are the two big ones in the US and actually across the globe, because as I said, what I've just described for this country applies to many, many other places, because this is the reality of the fact that we all face as human beings. And it potentially impacts our quality of life as well as jobs and manufacturing. So if we want to still have industries, they need water. If we still want to have agriculture and feed the population, we need water, and so on and so forth. So I think those are the two which have the most growth, what we call our growth booster in our strategic plan. And those are really, really, progressing super well as we speak.
Just last question we're thinking about with the new administration here in the United States, President Trump pulling out from the Paris Climate Accord, has also ordered federal agencies to immediately pause the spending of money from the Inflation Reduction Act, which is one that provided billions of dollars in subsidies to clean energy and other climate initiatives. What impact do you think that has overall? What impact, if any, does it have on your company? And just have about a minute left here.
So to keep very simple, Veolia has no contract with the central government, and we have no subsidies of the IRA. So direct impact, none on that front. The second thing I want to say is, we work at local level with industries or with municipalities. And the population across this country, whatever again their political orientation, are absolutely are desperate to have clean drinking water when they open their tap without PFAS in.
Yeah.
And we've tested that, we've surveyed that in the US, and 70% of the American population is very anxious about PFAS in their drinking water, and it's irrespective of if they are Democrat or Republican.
All right.
So this is really pushing very, very fast. And that's why we are really supported in terms of growth.
That is a disturbing statistic and sobering. Estelle, so glad we got time with you. Really, really appreciate it. Estelle Brachlianoff, she is the CEO of Veolia. It's the global environmental services company, as we said. They deal with waste management, water management, joining us here, based in Paris, but she is in Phoenix, Arizona today.